Pocahontas might be one of the most well-known historical figures from Jamestown, but we only have one image of her that we know for a fact was made during her lifetime, and that was an engraving created in 1616 by the artist Simon Van de Paths. It was created during Pocahontas' visit to London, which she was doing as sort of a promotional tour for the Virginia Company. As part of that tour, they had her dressed in exquisite, high-fashion English clothing, which can be seen in that portrait. I have always admired that image of her and what it represents as her being a native person who had to come to England, wear English clothing, and take an English name. So I really wanted to recreate the clothing that was seen in that portrait to represent her. Now, the outfit that's in the portrait, we don't exactly know everything that's going on because it's only a portrait from about waist high. So in order to figure out what kinds of clothes she's wearing, I needed to look at other images from the same time period. One really helpful image was a portrait of Queen Anne of Denmark, who was James I's consort. In that portrait, Anne is wearing a very similar style of hat to the kind that Pocahontas is wearing in her portrait, as well as a rabato collar, the lace collar that you see in that portrait and many other portraits from the early 17th century. Another feature that we see in Queen Anne's portrait that's seen in Pocahontas's is the type of sleeve that is on the gown. And so seeing that in Queen Anne's portrait made me think that that was a solid choice in interpreting what I was seeing in Pocahontas's portrait when it came to creating the outfit. There are a lot of different components that are in that outfit, from the gown that she's wearing underneath, where you can see all of the buttons that button up that gown, and there's this loose overgown that she's wearing on top of that. So this loose gown here, luckily there are at least 2 surviving examples in museums over in the UK, specifically the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. They have extensively photographed and researched those surviving overgowns, which allowed me to see how they were constructed. And there are publications that have come out recently that show step by step how the garments were created and detailing the different types of materials that were used. So based on looking at those extant or surviving examples, I was able to create this overgown as part of the outfit. I actually took the pattern from one of those surviving garments that was available in this publication and altered it so that it would be able to fit a 21st century person. The overgown is made out of silk damask, and that is also one of the fabrics that one of the surviving gowns is made out of. So when I'm looking to recreate historical clothing from an image, I like to be able to find surviving examples of that garment as essentially further evidence to help me make my case when making these garments. Another really fascinating part of the outfit, of course, is the rabato collar. And this is one that's probably also very alien to us in the 21st century. It can look very stiff and uncomfortable, but I've actually worn this, and it's really not that bad. But it does make me wonder often about how Pocahontas must have felt growing up in Powhatan clothing and how different it would be to wear English clothing like this. Like the silk overgown, there are surviving examples of these rabato collars in various museums around the world. Many of them are pretty well documented, and there actually is a collar like this at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So I was able to look at photos of that to figure out how something like this might have been made. It's not exactly very easy to see here, but there is lace and linen on top and a wire frame underneath. And that wire frame helps hold out the shape of the collar that you see here. The extant surviving examples are all made this way with a wire frame and some type of textile or lace that's placed on top of it. Now, not only do I look at period images or surviving examples when I'm studying historic clothing, I also like to look at textual evidence, so things that show up in newspapers or poems or letters. And in the case of the rabato, there was written evidence of them One in a workbook on how to learn French. There's a woman talking about her rabato made of wire and lace, and another earlier 16th century reference to these rabato collars, again, made out of wire and lace and fine linen. So oftentimes, we can find even more evidence to work off of from text examples like those. Altogether, this outfit represents very fashionable clothing from the early 17th century. So the Virginia Company was definitely trying to send a message about how successful they had been in Virginia, and Pocahontas was essentially a tool that they used to try to tell that story. But I also always like to remember Pocahontas's resilience and her native identity as well. Even though it's somewhat obscured by the clothing, she still is that strong Powhatan woman that we know still today, 400 years later. For more information about 17th and 18th century historical clothing and other topics from history, be sure to follow our channel, JYF Museums, and don't forget to like this video. We'll see you next time.